So our first speaker today, really needs no introduction. The name Paul Swanson is synonymous with the JJRS. Arriving in Nanzan in 1986, Paul served as an editor of the JJRS until his retirement in 2019. During his 3.5 decades, Paul was also a guest editor for multiple special issues and has agreed to be a guest editor for the special issue resulting from the Symposium. But under Paul's leadership, also the JJRS was at the vanguard of open access publishing and the move towards making academic articles available online. So I invited Paul to speak today for 2 reasons. So first, I asked him to talk about the history of the journal and what role it has played in the development of the study of Japanese religions. And second, I wanted to honor him for his many years of service to the field. So before handing over the mic to Paul, I would like everyone to join me in a round of applause to thank Paul for all of his work he's done.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all for coming today. It's a great pleasure to be here and to look back on the many years I spent here. My presentation today was originally called 35 Years of the JJRS to reflect what, as Matt said, the actual years that I spent as editor, but I asked that it be changed to 50 years of the JJRS because actually I had a contact with the JJRS from the very beginning, a very small one, but in 1974, I was finishing up my MA degree at Nanzan University. And my advisor, Father Berry, may he rest in peace, showed me a copy of a new journal, volume 1, number 1, March 1974, something I should keep my eyes on. The editor was David Reed. I knew David Reed, well, he was a Dai-senpai, but I knew who he was from spending summers at Lake Nojidi in Nagano, and also from monthly book studies groups that we were at. So I was finishing up at MA, and I thought I wanted to work. I didn't know what to do next, and I went to talk to David, and I asked him if there was something employment possible at the JJRS. He kind of dismissed it quickly with a smile. The office where he was at was very small in Nakano, provided by the Nisho Kosekai. I think he also was a volunteer. Their only employee was a part-time office worker. So he kind of smiled and said, well, I can't really give you any gainful employment here. Kind of sent me on my way with a couple suggestions for some other places. And so such was the inauspicious beginning of my connection with the JJRS, with little hope or expectation that it would be such a large part in my life. Today I'd like to talk about 3 topics in the history of the JJRS. First, a very quick look at the actual history, showing maybe how it has not only contributed to, but also followed and gained from the evolution or development of the study of Japanese religion in the West, and with a special emphasis on how we developed desktop publishing and open access and such things. Secondly, I'd like to take a close look. There's so many things to talk about in the JJRS, but I'd like to take a look at the various controversies that came up in the JJRS. There are a number of times when I had a controversial article, and then there was a response back and forth. And finally, I'd like to take a look at the special issues and why, how they developed and how they've been an important part of the JJRS. And I understand Harry Sensei will also talk about this, so I won't go into too much detail there. And if we have time, I'd like to finish up with a few comments maybe on what I think are current important topics in the study of religion in Japan, what I hope will be looked at more closely in the future. Particularly, I'd like to comment on Shinbutsubundi, not Shinbutsubundi, Shinbutsu Shinbutsu Yugo, as what I think to be the really core part of Japanese religion. So first, quick history of the JJRS. Matt has mentioned the basic outlines already. As he mentioned, the seeds of the JJRS was 10 years in a journal called Contemporary Religions in Japan, which was published between 1959 and 1969, I think, for 10 years. This final issue was a special issue on Soka-Rakkai and the Komeito, which is still a hot topic. And then this went defunct, as it were. And a few years later, believers David Reed and a number of people were instrumental with the help of the International Institute for the Study of Religions that was funded in great part by Bisho Kosekai, and came out with Japanese Journal of Religious Studies. And when it came out, it was quarterly, actually 3 times a year, 75 pages per quarter, but the summer journal issue was always about 150 pages. So 3 times a year in this size. And David Reed edited this for 8 years with the help of people like Jan Sungadal. And at that time, the approach was very much as a sociology of religion. Most of the people involved were specialists in sociology of religion. David Reed had gotten his PhD at Harvard, sociology of religion. Jan Swinburne in Europe, and he had a lot of contacts with the sociologists in Europe, like Carl Dobbelair and Brian Wilson. And then the University of Tokyo, Shinkyo Gaku faculty, like Iragawa and Akaike Sensei from Aichi Gakuin. So there was a lot of sociology of religion, but also things on Buddhism, field research and such. So it wasn't just a sociology of religion. Just to have my receipt from volume 1 for Reverend Paul Swanson. They got very long. So for 8 years, David Reed edited this. In the last year or two, he was on sabbatical, and Jan Swingadal took over for a year or two. And I'm not sure exactly how this happened, but they approached Nanzan asking if they were interested in taking over the journal. And I wasn't here at the time, but from what I've heard, it was discussed, and it was also talks with the university or what would be involved in editing a journal like this. And one of the demands or the requests that the Institute made was that if they were going to take over the journal, ask the university to set up a new position of copy editor. And I don't think anybody knew what a copy editor does or anything, but the university agreed. And this is really one of the secret weapons of the JJRS. We've had a strong string of copy editors. Now Caitlin is taking over, but not just copy editing, but as an associate editor. So before I came, the journal expanded to a slightly larger size and more pages. The camera-ready copy was made using a daisy wheel. I'm not sure anyone here knows what a daisy wheel is. It's a computerized typewriter that you load the data in it. There's a wheel with the type, and it types out the page, and you shift it back and put it into italics, and then it types into italics. It's really weird. But just about the time I came to Nanzan, laser printers began to be available. There was still 300 dpi, but a big improvement over the daisy wheel. The first copy editor was Mike Kelsey, who was already a faculty at Nanzan, but he moved to Indiana to start up his own editing business. And John Keenan took over, and I was the third copy editor. I came here in the summer of 1986. And I have to admit that I was not a good copy editor. I had no experience as a copy editor. I wasn't sure what a copy editor was supposed to do. I was more interested in other aspects of editing, and I quickly took over a lot of the evaluations and the preliminary editing and such, which Jan Swingerdahl was happy to let me do, and Jan Swingerdahl did the final proofreading, which he was very good at. So the first double issue, I came in summer of 1986, and already there was a collection of Religion and Society, a tribute to Yanagawa Keiichi. These double issues were already a big part of JJRS, so it's not something I started there. It was something that I thought was a very good idea, and I had two ideas. I wanted to do a special on Tendai, and I wanted to do a special on Shugendo. So, I did those two pretty, well, I was still a copy editor, actually. And because for a long time, even the laser printer wasn't good enough at 300 dpi dots per inch to do kanji, we would have the kanji printed by a place called Quicks, high resolution. Then in the final copy, camera-ready copy, we cut out the kanji and pasted in. And I remember once, the next day we had to give the camera-ready copy to the printer, so we were up until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. If we got something wrong, we had to reprint that page and do a little bit again. And it was really a big jump when the 600 dpi laser printers were available. Finally, we could print kanji that was good enough resolution to read directly. By the way, in the late 80s, we were not allowed yet to use our Kenkyuki to buy computers or software. The stance of the university was, what does a researcher need a law pro? They're just going to spend money to play Pac-Man or Speed. And so Jim and I used to fly down to Hong Kong or Taiwan, buy knockoff PCs and bring them back. And I worked very hard to set up computerized camera-ready copy. May I add here that Jim Huzig was another one of our secret weapons in the JJRS. He was always on the edge of the envelope, always wanting the newest equipment and software to make sure that the JJRS and other publications were the highest quality. I think of him as the George Martin of the JJRS. George Martin, for those who don't get it, is the fifth Beatle, right? Okay. Soon after I took over as full-time editor from Jan Swingerdahl, we switched to two issues a year. And by then, we were getting 400, 500 pages of material per year. And printing it and mailing it out 3 times a year was a lot of trouble and expense. So we switched to twice a year, the spring and the fall, which my Australian copy editors didn't like. That was North Hemispheric, because of course down under it is fall and spring. But anyway, we eventually changed to 1 and 2. Right now it's just 1 and 2. And as you can see, it becomes much heavier. And eventually we went to online where people could order the whole year in 1 volume. Connected with computers and stuff is the question of open access. I don't think I have time to go too much into this, but we were doing desktop publishing and open access before the names were even well known. From a very early time, we provided everything we had on our PDFs online. And I think that's one of a secret of the JJRS's success is that it's been open access as soon as we could do that. And in fact, it led to the situation now where we do only open access. You can order a hard copy if you want to through Amazon, but it's immediately available open access. And may I just make a quick comment there about, unfortunately, open access now implies that someone, the author or the university pays the publisher so that it can be open access. And the last few years I was editor, I would get these letters from people who would say, how much do I have to pay you to publish in the JJRS? And it was shocking at first, and because to me, the idea of paying someone, or someone paying us not to publish, and I would write back and say, no, that's not how we work. We're open access, which just means that everything that comes in and that we do is available for free. And I wish that's what open access meant in the field in large, but unfortunately, that's not true. But as I said, about 10 years ago, we moved to only online. We stopped subscriptions and hard copies. One reason was it cost us more to maintain the database and mail it out and print it. And we never changed the subscription price. It was $35 a year from when I came in to when we stopped. The only other option, if we were going to balance the budget, was to raise the subscription to $100 a year or something, which is what a lot of journals do. And one of the key for doing this was we had a symposium of advanced PhD students to give talks in Japanese, to give them opportunity to give talks in Japanese. And the first one was about 10 years ago, I think. And Jolien was here, and Ethan were part of the original. And we had prepared a packet of books and stuff to give to the participants. And a couple of the PhD students came up to me and says, this is the first time I've held a JJRS copy in my hand. And it's not as if they weren't using the JJRS, they were, but they just, a hard copy was superfluous. And then also they said, they didn't want to carry this heavy bag of books back home with them because, what used to they have for the hard copy. And I decided, okay, this is it, and there are some people who may want a hard copy, and we arranged that it'd be available through Amazon. But now it's immediately online and online only. And the last line in the history is that 2-3 years ago, well, more than 2-3 years ago, because Matt came to the Institute quite a while ago and we gradually shifted, and he's taken over now. So thank you, Matt. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about is how, I wouldn't say exactly that we courted controversy, but I welcomed controversy and I refereed controversy. If I would get a controversial article, well, sometimes it would be published and then someone would respond to it and I would get the response of the original author and kind of go back and forth. The first one of these was John Keenan's article in 1989 called Spontaneity in Western Martial Arts, a Yogacara Critique of Mushin. And a year later, Stuart McFarland, who was teaching in UK and also teaching martial arts in the UK, wrote an article, Mushin Morals and Martial Arts, a discussion of Keenan's Yogacara Critique. And I showed that to John Keenan, and he wrote a short reply, which were published in 1990. And a year later, Stuart wrote another response, The Mystique of Martial Arts, a reply to Professor Keenan's response. That I put an end to it. But so over the period of 3 years, we had this kind of back and forth. This is the late 80s, so you didn't have the internet where you can immediately get a response. And it was the only one that kind of went over a period of 3 years like this. But this controversy was interesting because it was kind of an early glimpse into critical Buddhism, which is not surprising because John Keenan and I and Jamie had just spent a year with Hakamaya in Wisconsin, and a lot of the issues that were raised came to the fore by what came to be known as critical Buddhism and the percolating. Also, it's an early salvo, which was perfected by Robert Scharf on criticizing modern Zen. Right? Second article was Ian Reader wrote an article called Letters to the Gods, the Form and Meaning of Emma. This article grew out of a discussion Ian and I had when he was visiting us over lunch. I said I liked Emma, and he liked Emma, and he should write an article about that. Okay. He always used to say I could never go to Nanzan without Swanson telling me to write a new article. But actually, it was the other way around too. He was always so full of ideas that we talked about something, and then a year later he'd send an article. But this article on Emma, there was a response that I published a year later from Richard Anderson entitled "What Constitutes Religious Activity?" arguing that people buying Emma and such were not religious activities. And also at the same time, I published a response by reader who says, well, yes, these are not religious activities. So this is an early kind of back and forth on what's still a hot topic of what is religion or what is Shinto. Also, we had the article in 1989, Neil McMullen's article on historiographical issues in the study of modern Japanese religions. But this took 3 years. After that article came out, it was not controversial, but a very inspiring article in many ways. But J.B. Hubbard wrote a response called Pre-Modern, Modern, and Postmodern Doctrine and Study of Japanese Religions, which I showed to McMullen, and he wrote a response called Which Doctrine, Whose Religion, which we published in 1992. So this is an interesting kind of one of the first give and takes that kind of took up the Buddha's Kenmitsu Taisei angle. Then we have the Tyler versus Papard back and forth, which may be the most famous controversy, but certainly the most intense and acerbic give and take. Susan Tyler reviewed Ellen Papard's book, The Protocol of the Gods, and obviously her husband, Royal Tyler, who was at her side writing it. I knew it was, it raised a lot of questions about the book. And I didn't want to publish it as it is. I'll publish it as it is, but I sent it to Alan and allowed him to write a response. And his response was also very acerbic. So the Tylers also wrote a response to the response. And I was able to publish all of these together in the 1994 issue. I should add that my policy at the JJRS was we don't publish negative reviews of bad books, because if they're bad books, let's just ignore them. But if it's an important book that has problems, and this was one of those, I went out of my way, and actually the Tylers were very hesitant to write a review because they knew what they said was going to be very critical. But this also touches on Kenmitsu Taisei and what is religion. And I think it was, and despite the bad feelings that arose from this very kind of acerbic back and forth, I think it was one of the highlights of the JJRS. There's a couple more I want to mention that are controversies within the JJRS, but there was an article by Bill Bodiford on Zen and the Art of Religious Prejudice, efforts to reform a tradition of social discrimination, which looked at Sotoshu, especially at period Sotoshu, and how discriminatory practices took place. And when it was published in English in the JJRS, there was no real kind of negative response, but someone at Komazawa Daigaku and associated with the Anti-Discrimination League published a Japanese translation of it. And immediately this blew up. I was kidding. There was a paper given at the Shinto Gakkai attacking Bodiford. I believe that Bodiford was asked to resign from the committee that was translating Dogen's text into English because of this scandal. I think a lot of the problems were with the Japanese translation. It made it sound like Bill didn't know what he was talking about, which is not true. You know, Bill Bodiford, he's a very careful scholar. So that was a controversy, but kind of outside of the JJRS. There was another essay by Yamada Shoji criticizing Perigal's Zen and the Art of Archery, which I happened to come across one day while I was lounging in the Shuken library, journal libraries, and it was in the journal of the Nichibuken, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And I contacted Yamada Sensei and published it and translated it into English. As you all know, Zen and the Art of Archery, I mean, it's a classic of modern Western Zen. It's very exciting read. And he pointed out there's many kind of strange parts of that book that don't sound that like they really happened. But anyway, there was never an official response that we published in the JJRS to this, but I did get queries from martial arts experts in Europe and the US who wanted to know more about this. And, I'm like finding out that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were kind of originally not such an exciting story. A third comment on special issues, as I said previously, there was a quarterly with the spring and the fall of 75 pages and then a double issue. So before it came to Nanzan, there were already many double issues like Brian Wilson in Japan or Women and Religion in Japan. I think it was one of the first journals to take up. Okay. And then after it came to Nanzan, there was brought to the special issue on religious studies in Japan. Jim Isaac did a tribute to Heinrich Dumoulin. So basically, it was still kind of an internal thing. Especially the next three after I came was the Tendai, and then we did Crisis, and I did some, and then Shigendo. These were all guest editors, but still kind of an internal matter. But the next special issue that Peter Nosko did on the Emperor system in 1990 was kind of a turning point. We could see that this was an important topic coming out. Showa Emperor was passing away, and people were looking forward to the enthronement ceremonies. What's the wedding? What does it involve? There was very little in English. I think the only thing available was Robert Elwood's book, published in Sophia a long time ago. We thought there's a lot of material on Daijosai and stuff that really needs to be out there. We weren't capable of doing it. So I thought, well, what can we get to edit this? I think I contacted Robert Elwood, and he didn't want to do it for some reason, but he suggested a young scholar named Peter Nosko, who was at the USC at that time, University of Southern California. So I contacted Peter and visited him in Los Angeles. I remember sitting in his kitchen table talking about the special issue, and he was able to bring in a lot of people that we didn't have contacts with, and came up with this special issue on Emperor system, which came out just in time for all the enthronement ceremonies and stuff that was going on. And looking back, this was really a turning point because this set the pattern, kind of getting an outside guest editor who had contacts and knew more about what was going on a certain topic than we did ourselves. And would bring in people who were then affiliated, had a contact with the JJRS. So it's really greatly expanded our network, and I think it's been very important in the history of the JJRS. And just to mention quickly, so, I mean, you have the list in the late 1990s and 2000, like, for example, we had the Kuroda Toshiro special issue in 1996, the issue on pilgrimage in 1997, Meiji Zen in 1998, Nichiren, Jackie did with 1999, Shinto and the Kami worship 2002, Feminism and Religion in Japan, Noriko-san, thank you, in 2003, and so forth. I mean, if you look at the list, you see it. And one thing I think, just to briefly mention, I think we were talking about this over lunch too, that these special issues were actually monographs or books. And maybe I think times have changed now, but at that time, late 90s, publishers were very hesitant to publish collections of, very little sales. And so we kind of stepped into that gap and provided an opportunity for things that may have grown into a book, but a special issue of the JJRS comes out quickly. It focuses on something that people are now working on. And so in a sense, the collection of the JJRS also includes many 10, 15, 20 books on very specific topics. I think that have contributed a lot to the field. One of the things that was brought up for possible inclusion in this talk are, what are the issues now? What are the important issues now and in the future? And I kind of step back and think, well, I've been away from the field for 2 or 3 years now, and I already feel like I've lost my touch with what's happening. And so I look forward to what the younger generation today will talk about as being important topics that need to be looked at now and in the future. But a few that I thought of were some obvious ones, like the question of what is religion, and even a different question is what is shukyo. This is an unending. People may have decided one way or the other, but still, it's an important topic out there that you have to be aware of. I'm one who feels strongly that the term religion in shukyo is still very relevant and useful, but I understand that there are people who don't feel that way, and they do have a certain perspective, but it's certain to come up over and over again. Another topic that's sure to be looked at more closely is that of gender. I think JJRS has done more on that and some other journals, and I think will continue to be an important topic. There's the question of AI, not so much as a topic for studies, but something that we have to be aware of as editors. How much of a submission has been generated through the use of AI, and is that necessarily bad? People refer to dictionaries and they write their articles. What's wrong with asking a question to an AI and then getting an answer and then using that, not copy and pasting, but using that information to develop your arguments. That is an issue that you all have to deal with. I'm out of here. Another, I think, very interesting topic, which overlaps with a lot of other fields, is that of popular culture, religion, and anime, for example, or video games. So many religious figures appear in video games. What does that mean, and how's it used? Or in movies. Yokai is a very hot topic. It has been. I don't know if it still is. Yokai is still a big topic. Yeah. My wife loves yokai. I used a lot of my Kentucky in the last few years to buy books on yokai. So these are things I think that need more attention from a religion studies perspective. And what does it mean in modern Japanese culture for these religious figures or themes to appear in anime games or yokai? And how far can you call them religious items? Right? Another topic I think is, and maybe this is already happening, but looking at early new religions and new religions and Shinshiko are now becoming old religions or established religions. So I think this is a good topic of seeing how things like Soka-gakkai or Shoko-sakai or Tendikyo, these were new religions. They're not new anymore. They're going through generational change. How are they changing? What effect does this have? I think that's worthy of us a special issue. But closer to my heart is Shugendo and Shinbutsu Yugo. When I was I'm in Buddhist studies now, but I started out studying Shugendo, the Omine pilgrimage. And at that time, there was almost nothing on Shugendo. There was Conan Blacker's book on Katokubo. There was Earhart's book on Abudo, Shugendo. And Hori Ichigo's book on folk religion had a few things, but almost very little. I mean, of course, in Japanese, there's a whole mountain of stuff, but in English, but in German, there was the Yamabushi, and in French, there was something by Ronendo, I think. But these are like 100 years old. But now, we've got a lot of stuff on Shugendo coming out, and there's still so much more under the rubric of Shugendo that would be very interesting and good to follow up on. And even broader than Shugendo is the topic of Shimbutsu Shugo. And I know Yoshida Sensei has published a book called Shimbutsu Yugo because Shimbutsu Shugo is a Meiji area term, and it's actually that we should use Shimbutsu Yugo. But in English, it's the same. I mean, it's the idea of fusion or combinatory, whether you use Shugo or Yugo. In English, it's the same thing. But I think Shimbutsu Shugo is really the common basic religion of Japan. I'll stick my neck out here. And in a very broad sense of it referring to the combinatory aspects of Japanese religion and culture. And I'll come back to this later, but I'll stick my neck out even further. And I think Shimbutsu Shugo, or combinatory religion, is the basic form of all religion and society around the world. There's no religion or society that is, pure this and hasn't been affected or incorporated anything else. I grew up in a conservative evangelical Baptist environment. Many of the people I knew there believed that they were following a pure and unadulterated way of Jesus. And no one seemed to be aware that it was strange that up on the altar there was a very large American flag, as if that's the most obvious thing for a Christian to do. Or that, Santa Claus is a big part of Christmas, or bunnies, chocolate bunnies were a big part of Easter. These are just kind of trivial examples, but I know there are a lot of Christians, a lot of probably Islamic people who think that their religion is very pure and not affected by, other aspects, cultural aspects that are not part of the pure tradition. But I think that's a false assumption. And I think it would be good if European or American religious studies would take the Shimbutsu Shugo concept and apply it also to, Western religions and see if that does. I mean, the Japanese religious studies has often taken up Western categories like, secularization or Brian Wilson or Bella, this or and use those categories to look at Japanese religions, and that's fine. But I think it's time, maybe, I hope, that, and this is a category or a way of explaining religious activity that would be useful, I think, outside the Japanese context. Yoshida Sensei and many people now point out how Shimbutsu Shugo is not unique to Japan. All over Asia is Shimbutsu Shugo. And I just expanded that beyond Asia to the whole world. But let's take a closer look at the words themselves, Shinbutsu, Shingo, or Yugo, the combination of Shin and Butsu. And sometimes this is translated the fusion of Shinto and Buddhism. And this might describe what historically happened. But Shinbutsu Shingo is much more than that. I mean, and it also involves the abstractization of Shinto and Buddhism and combining, and it's much more complicated than that. But I'd like to look at the words Kami and Buddha, or Shin and Butsu, and look at them in a very general sense, so that Kami doesn't just refer to, Shinto gods like Amaterasu or whatever, but refers to any awesome figure, yokai or Kami, right? And dragons and foxes and spirits, mountains, trees, ancient historical figures, even maybe the gods and saints of Christianity and Islam can be included under Shin. So it's not just the uniquely Japanese Kami being amalgamated with Buddhas, but it can refer to a much more general idea of Kami in a very general sense. I've sometimes told my Nanzan class on Japanese religion that it's in Japan now, it's not just Shinbutsu Shingo, it's Shinbutsuki Shingo, because, they buy Kentucky Fried Chicken for Christmas. And, the various aspects, very few Japanese are Christians, but there are many kind of aspects of Christianity which have been incorporated, and not necessarily people are aware of this, but they're part of the daily life of Japanese. Of course, whether it's religious or not is another question. But also, you have Butsu or Hotoke. So, this can refer to, the Buddhas like Amitabha Shakyamuni or the Bodhisattvas of traditional Buddhism. But the term in Japan, probably other places too, is a much wider meaning. If you ask someone on the street in Japan, what is Hotoke? They say, the dead people. It's not Buddha. So Butsu Hotoke also has a very large meaning that refers to various specific figures from the Buddhist tradition. But it's also much more than that. When people talk about Hotoke, it's the ancestors, the dead people. Yobutsu Sutta doesn't mean you become enlightened, it means you die. So this is, it's not up to me anymore, but if I had a lot of time on my hands, it's a topic I'd like to pursue more, but I'd like to throw it out as something that I hope we will look at. One more thing, I want to make a distinction between what I want to call explicit Shinbutsu Shingo and implicit Shinbutsu Shingo. So the explicit Shinbutsu Shingo is kind of like specific sites where it's very clear that, various deities or whatever are together, or maybe specifically to the Japanese way of combining these things. All of us know, of course, in the Japanese way, there's a myriad of ways that it's all that combined and such in Japan. And implicit Shinbutsu Shingo refers, to me, is the kind of way of ordinary Japanese of accepting all these different kind of religious figures and practices into their daily life without it being a kind of explicit way, but it's kind of an implicit way of dealing with various aspects of Japanese culture. And also the implicit Shinbutsu Shingo, I'd like to broaden it to include outside Japan, that all of religion and society has this kind of implicit combining of various aspects. And since I do have time, another 5 minutes, I'd like to give 2 examples from just recently. And these examples could be multiplied endlessly. All of you, I'm sure, have had similar experiences. I'd like to talk a little bit about a friend of mine who is the eldest son of a landowner and farmer of many traditions northeast of Nagoya, near where I live. He graduated from Keynote University, and he's had a long and fruitful career working in the research labs of the Nagoya Fire Department. And he's now retired. And he's certainly not, I mean, he's an ordinary guy. He's not what I would, consider a particularly religious person, but recently he called us and he wanted to come over for some advice about something. And he came over in the afternoon, we had tea. And the problem was on his land, near his house, there was a small shrine to the local Yuji, the dragon god, which is very important to him, the water that comes for his land. And it was old and the roof was kind of falling apart, so he wanted to fix it up. But as he was taking the roof off, he bumped into the statue of Yuji and it fell and broke. And the advice he wanted from us is, should I be worried? What should I do? I asked me, but I guess the answer of why I asked me is, Swanson says there's a specialist in religious studies, so maybe, he has good advice about what he should do, and advice was, well, just get back together. So he got some super glue and, fix it up, and so he's had any problems then. But it's not just, this is just one example. He's also very active in his local shrine. A couple of years ago, he was part of the committee in charge of the Yanmatsu, the year-end bonfire and such event. He's very devout in taking care of his family altar. His mother died recently. The altar is connected with local, I think it's Otoshi shrine, could be anything. In fact, he came and visited us in Nagano a few months ago. It's a 3-hour train drive. And we said, stay overnight and, take the train back in the morning. But he said, no, I have to get back and I can't ignore my responsibility to my mother's ihai at the altar. And wow, you're gonna spend 3 hours coming over to Nagano and then in the evening rush back. That's a pretty devout religious devotion. So from my perspective, he's not a religious or kind of overtly spiritual person, but he's got all these, what I think could be called religious activity. The problem I have is, I'm happy to call them religious activities, but I'm not sure it's shukyoteki. So what raises the question to me is, well, obviously I'm making some sort of distinction between the English religion and Japanese shukyo, which needs to be worked out. Certainly to this man, if I would ask him if he is a shukyoteki person, he was like, somehow that term just doesn't kind of fit in Japanese, right? So that's one thing we have to be worried about. The second example is in January, I was in Nagano again, and the local shrine near where my daughter's house is had their New Year's Matsuri. And I discovered that Tokucho, what they do at the New Year's Matsuri is that people would bring a Dharma doll that they had bought the previous year and kept in their house and bring it to the shrine. And it's burned there. They buy another Dharma doll, bring it home to place it somewhere all year. And, all day there were these groups, families, like Oji-chan, Ba-chan, down to little kids, carrying the Dharma doll to the shrine and coming back. Some had little ones, some had these huge Dharma dolls. And I should have looked into it more carefully. I don't know if something has written on them or whatever, but anyway, they take them home. And the next year they bring it back to the shrine, kind of like Anna. And I thought, it'd be very strange if I would go up to people on the way to or back saying, why are you carrying a Dharma doll? Don't you know that Bodhidharma is a Buddhist patriarch, and why do you go to a Japanese shrine and you get a statue of a Buddhist patriarch? I mean, this would be ridiculous. The people would think, who's this crazy gaijin, and he doesn't understand anything. And of course, there's the whole history of the image of Dharma developed in Japanese society. I think in Asian folklore studies, there was a good article about that many years ago. So Dharma, of course, now is a combinatory figure, which of course has Buddhist roots, but is much more beyond that. Whether you call it a religious figure or not, again, it's a matter of vocabulary, I guess. Okay, so my time is up in more ways than one. So let me just stop, and I look forward to the various comments about the younger generation, and just say that old editors never die, they just have a final deadline. Thank you for your attention.